Will Bloodborne ever come to PC or get an update to next-gen consoles, or will there ever be a Bloodborne sequel? Well, while you wait, you might want to check out Liza P. This is not the first game on the horizon to be compared to one of the more popular FromSoftware titles. We've seen Lords of the Fallen compared to Elden Ring, and now we're seeing Liza P called a Bloodborne copycat. I've got an article here from PC Gamer I want to look at with you, but I also want to look at some of their results when they let people play their game, because they did let people play Liza P who had not played a FromSoftware, a Souls-like game before. And we're seeing this grow in popularity, but we're also seeing some problems. A game recently called Bleak Faith used some animation sets that they bought from the Epic Store that were apparently one-to-one made animations from Elden Ring. I guess they were made just for fun. They weren't necessarily made for commercial use. And now we're seeing other games even get DMCA claims and things like this for sort of copying other games. So obviously looking to Liza P to be similar to Bloodborne is not surprising, given the art style and the movements and how much the character sort of even looks like it's in a similar time period as things that we have seen from Bloodborne. And I've always had people tell me that Bloodborne is the best, and every time some scammer on Twitter wants to throw out a fake Bloodborne PC leak or a Bloodborne 60 FPS next-gen update leak, and it's always fake and everybody gets really mad and it trends on Twitter, but I definitely think everybody is long awaiting a game to come to be like Bloodborne or a sequel to come. So Liza P could have something really special in its corner if the article here from PC Gamer is to be believed. And not only that, let's just take a look at, they did a survey of participants in the game to let people try it out, and 34% of the participants had never played a Souls-like game before. So basically a third of the people who tried it out had never played one before, and I really thought some of these stats were really important. This one here especially, opinions on difficulty, was it well balanced? And the people here you can see that are inexperienced Souls-like participants, 90% of them felt that it was. They said, yeah, this is a well-balanced difficulty game. And then experienced Souls-like players and hardcore Souls participants landed higher. Actually, the smaller percentage here are the hardcore. That's kind of interesting. Maybe they didn't think it was hard enough, right? If you ever met these Souls guys, if you've ever met the From boys, they're pretty hardcore, and maybe that's why. But there's also this question here, the hands-on impressions, the controls felt good. I think this is equally important. If the controls don't feel good, or it's clunky or not responsive, that's not going to be a good experience. And you can see here, inexperienced Souls players landed at an 86%. So I thought these stats were really encouraging going into the game. So while I think it'll be fun to entertain the idea that it's going to be considered like a Bloodborne copycat or a game that's very similar to Bloodborne, that's great for the From boys, but it's also great for anybody who's wanting to dip their toes in, since a third of the participants said that it felt balanced and very good with respect to the controls. So Liza P is so blatantly Bloodborne that I feel bad for liking it, says Wes Fenlon of PC Gamer. I'm not proud of falling for the copycat, but this is where the lack of a Bloodborne on PC has led me. Many people dying to see a Bloodborne PC port, as well as maybe just a next-gen update so you could get 60 FPS. So there are Souls-likes that copy the difficulty of Dark Souls, or the corpse runs, or the Forlorn Fantasy worlds. A lot of them copy all of the above. But the fonts, that's a level of shameless reproduction that makes me hiss through my teeth a bit, which is what I wanted to do when I started up a demo of Liza P, the Pinocchio Souls game that's been mildly obsessed with. We've all been mildly obsessed with since last year. The twist, which I'm still trying to process, is that it also seems like it's pretty darn good. I think he's being funny here about the fonts, right? I would assume that this has been a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Liza P is such an odd thing. I'd love to know if the developers decided the world desperately needed a dark and moody Pinocchio video game first, or decided to make their own version of FromSoftware's Bloodborne before pouring through the public domain to find the right puppet. If they just started it a couple years later, maybe it would have been a Winnie the Pooh game. Whatever the origin story, Liza P is 100% committed to the bit. So if you're unaware, this is kind of a thing, right? you have these properties that are now becoming public domain because of their age. So you're seeing like a Winnie the Pooh scary movie, and now you got a Pinocchio video game. The game looks and moves like a younger sibling of Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, with the sort of measured pace that requires care in dodging big enemy strikes. You can run past mobs, but only with some deliberate kiting. Light and heavy attacks, familiarly mapped to a controller's right bumper and trigger by default, can be chained into multiple strikes. Perhaps the most telltale sign here is that this isn't Bloodborne, is that it's running at a much smoother 60 frames per second than FromSoftware's Gothic PS4 masterpiece. Now, many people think that I get hung up on this needlessly. I really struggle to play 30 FPS games. I was getting some grief for being excited about the next Zelda game because we know that Tears of the Kingdom will be a 30 FPS game. And a lot of that has to do with the gameplay, right? I'm willing to sort of play that game, but here's the real truth of it. I'm only really willing to play Zelda at 30 because I can't really play it anywhere else. I don't have an affinity or a nostalgic connection with Bloodborne, which is why I just can't go and play it. I'm just going to have to wait like everybody else for the PC port or a next-gen update, which I think is going to be very difficult, because that game has likely got all of its iframes, its animation sets, its movement, its combat. It's probably all tied to the 30 FPS, and switching that would require an entire port of the game. You'd likely be looking at sort of a Demon's Souls remaster, or remake, actually, because you wouldn't just be remastering it, right? The Demon's Souls remake is significant. It's not a remaster, but maybe just a remaster of Bloodborne would enable them to do it. I'm not sure. After Elden Ring's vast sprawl, it was refreshing, exciting even, to put my hands on a game that feels so much like the more constrained games FromSoftware was making a few years ago. From the one area I explored, a dilapidated factory, Liza P seems to have learned its lesson well. There are raised walkways with surprise drops into rooms where shambling automata wait to attack. There are intimidating monsters roaming around near smaller groups, ready to chase you into a pincer attack. There is a tall ladder you climb down directly into a poison fog where a towering boss awaits to step on you. Of course, there's a glowing item in there inviting you to linger a few seconds too long. It sounds awesome, by the way. I mean, I think the art style of Liza P is one of the things that really sold me on it, but I also think the combat just looks really enjoyable, and I am encouraged by the fact that non-FromSoftware aficionados found it to be a balanced and fun game. My favorite discovery in the demo was that Pinocchio has a mechanical arm, allowing him to take advantage of his not a real boy status to equip a grappling hook or a cannon that fires explosive charges that I detonate after a few seconds. I have to admit, I'm smitten with seriously Liza P seems to be taken its interpretation of this setting with clockwork soldiers and possessed marionettes and messed up clowns, just a few of the steampunk circus enemies I saw in a half an hour. I actually think that it's a creative take as well on putting you into a really creepy environment. The enemies, I think, look phenomenal, not just Pinocchio himself, but just the setting and the enemies and even their movement. I was told, too, that dialogue choices, lies, you make throughout the story will affect how it plays out, which is as standard as video game design choices come, but actually pretty funny in a game about Pinocchio. Maybe really funny when Liza P seems to be treating its story with the same detached earnestness as any FromSoftware doomed post-apocalypses. HBO Mario Kart comes to mind. If you haven't seen that skit, it's actually pretty funny, but I'm interested to see how that plays a role, because they show that group that's like hunting you down or trying to find you, and they're like anti-lies or whatever. So I wonder if the more lies you choose, maybe the more they show up. Maybe they're harder to fight or something of that nature. I don't know if they've released any of that information about the mechanics. I've covered the game here and there, but I couldn't really get a grapple on whether or not telling lies or running into those people was going to be something that happened on a regular basis, or if it was just a part of the narrative in general. This person here that writing the article, Wes, says, I kind of love it, or I want to love it. It's just that everything about Liza P feels like it's skirting the razor's edge of copyright infringement, or at least extending its nose well past the point of homage into outright aesthetic theft. I don't know if I agree with this. I've not seen anything. Obviously, I'm not super well versed in Bloodborne, but I've seen plenty of the footage. I've seen plenty of the gameplay, and I've seen plenty of the snapshots that get, increased and HDified up to trick everybody on Twitter. And I don't think I've seen anything in Liza P that would even come close to that claim. I mean, there's a ton of inspiration, but it's very much its own game with its own art style. It's hard not to see Sekiro's arm prosthetics being an influence here, or the delicate serif font FromSoftware has been using in its game for years. Even Pinocchio himself looks like he was created by Midjourney AI, trained exclusively on moody photos of Timothy Chalamet. Now, I actually think this is well stated. Pinocchio is quite beautiful. He's very good looking, and Timothy is obviously gorgeous. So I get what they're saying here, but I really don't think that the inspiration of Sekiro, or even the art style, sort of the gothic art style, is something you could attribute to any kind of theft. I don't agree with that. I think they're being a little hyperbolic just for the sake of the article. But I do think this game stands on its own with respect to art style and artistic vision and artistic direction. In my short time playing, there were also warning signs that Liza P will fall into some of the same shortcomings of other Souls-likes. The one boss I went up against, a towering robot, was the opposite of fun, just a clunky stepper I had to stab in the ankles in a pool of poison water. The thing is, though, from what I've seen and what I've read, a lot of the times in Liza P, your build and your choice of weaponry and things are going to play a significant role. So I wonder if this was meant to be a traditional Souls-like game where you're just sort of like chopping at their ankles, right? I do sometimes feel like they just sort of turn you into a roly-poly ankle biter, but I also think sometimes it comes down to your build, which I'm not sure if that's the case here in Liza P. I remember reading some of the early reviews of Hogwarts Legacy, and one person was saying like troll fights just took forever, but they clearly rushed through the game and didn't have a lot of the build options and a lot of the strength. Like if you really build yourself up strong, you could take them out very fast and very efficiently. There could be similar things going on here, maybe just not enough experience playing it, not well versed enough in the different builds to try. I'm not sure. Most of the time I couldn't aim the camera high enough to see past his waist. Well, that's true to form in FromSoft games. They love to put you, knee high to an enemy, and they're like above you, and you feel like you're breaking your neck trying to look up to see them. None of FromSoftware's imitators have come close to recreating the studio's best boss fights, and this one seems more on par with some of the worst. This is always going to be, I think, a challenge when you want to put a person against a large character. You want it to feel ominous, threatening. You want them to be bigger than you. You want them to feel as if they're sort of filling up the screen. I do think that's always going to be a challenge. Elden Ring frustrated me so many times with certain fights. The death birds or whatever they are, like the weird looking Tweety birds, the stinking dragons that you like literally can't see, and the fire giant. I just think there's times where they go into what I consider to be almost like jumping the shark territory. You've gone so big that you've gone full. It's just too much, and I think it leads to unenjoyable experiences for the player when they don't feel empowered to kind of see what's going on. But Liza P is clearly a big game, and there may be far better or more unique bosses waiting past the confines of the demo. It's shameless, but I'd be lying if I said, they'd be lying. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to go out there and fight them. So I think this is a good article just to say, hey, there's a lot of similarities here to Bloodborne, but I really don't think that there's anything substantive here to sort of prove or claim that there's any kind of theft going on. I do think more and more studios are going to have to be on guard for this. They're going to have to be very careful with how they handle animation usage. I remember when there was a game coming out, I believe it's Wu Chang Fallen Feathers. I might have gotten the name of that one wrong, but I remember people being very upset at the fact that it was like one-to-one animation sets from Dark Souls. After what happened to Bleak Faith, I wouldn't be surprised if more and more games start being very cautious about doing that, maybe being a little bit too copy-paste. Try to create your own thing. But as far as I can tell, Liza P has done just that. So if you like this video, hit subscribe, hit the bell button so I can see you in the next one.